Namaskar and good evening. I start with the excerpt of a poem titled Wanting to Die by Sexton. Since you ask, most days I cannot remember. I walk in my clothing, unmarked by that voyage. Then the almost unnameable lust returns. Even then, I have nothing against life. I know well the grass blades you mention, the furniture you have placed under the sun. But suicides have a special language. Like carpenters, they want to know which tools. They never ask, why build? As I mentioned, this is an excerpt from the poem Wanting to Die. When I read it, it literally punched me in the face with its directness, rawness, and deeply personal emotions. It was last year that I chanced upon this poem when I was leafing through a collection of American poems. And I had a gut-wrenching reaction. It got me thinking, and it took me to Rabindranath Tagore's Poems on Death. Sexton and Rabindranath. Sexton and Rabindranath Tagore. Together. Why? But it got me thinking again. I thought, why not? And so here I am. I'm Maitreyee Chakraborty, and this project is called East Meets West, Tagore and Sexton. In this video, I will talk about a couple of common themes that these two poets loved and wrote about. These two poets, Rabindranath Tagore and Sexton, indeed, could not have been more different from each other. They wrote in different languages, different styles, and of course, they do not belong to the same era or country or culture. Yet, both of them, I felt, and I know so, were trailblazers and geniuses in their own ways, and started a revolution in the history of their respective literatures. I'm thankful and extremely grateful to Newton, Wellesley, and Weston cultural councils for supporting this project. Let me start by giving you a glimpse of Rabindranath Tagore, the Indian poet, writer, and humanist who wrote in the language Bengali, the language I speak. So, Tagore was born in a place called Jorashako, Kolkata, India, in 1861 to a progressive family in a then largely conservative and patriarchal society. So on the screen, you are seeing Tagore's birth home that has been later converted into a museum. Tagore grew up in this progressive, culturally rich family and started writing when he was 15 and continued until he passed away at 80. This man wrote prolifically on myriad topics like love, spiritualism, nature, woman, gender, death, just to name a few. He wrote 12 novels, more than 50 plays, about 200 short stories, 50 odd volumes of poetry, and wrote and composed some 2,000 beautiful songs. Interestingly, if this is not enough, at 67 he also took up painting and left behind some 2,500 paintings and drawings. And he traveled. This man traveled. In a span of 20 years, he visited 34 countries, including the US, either as a state guest or on public speaking engagements. During these tours, he inspired, bewildered, provoked debate, and some controversy as well. And along the way, in 1913, he became the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize for Literature for his collection of poems called Gitanjali. Gitanjali is translated as song offerings. If you ask me or any Bengali friends around the world, we will have the same opinion. Rabindranath Tagore modernized and beautified the Bengali language and left a legacy that is truly unmatchable. At this point, I want to switch over to talk about Anne Sexton. Anne Sexton was an American confessional poet, born right here in my neighborhood in Newton, Massachusetts, and also lived in Wellesley and Weston. She lived from 1928 to 1974 and led a life of extreme mental anguish and profound creativity. She married at 19, dabbled in modeling, gave birth to 2 daughters, suffered from severe postpartum depression, and was admitted to psychiatric hospital many times. So during one of those times, a therapist encouraged her to write poetry because she used to love writing poetry when in high school. And she enrolled in a local poetry workshop. Her work earned Sexton a scholarship to Robert Lowell of Boston University. Her first published work came out in 1960. According to Katha Pollitt of the New York Times, within 10 years of Anne Sexton's first published work of poetry in 1960, she became, and I quote, one of the most honored poets in America, a Pulitzer Prize winner, a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, the first female member of the Harvard chapter of Phi Beta Kappa, and the subject of a television documentary. End quote. In her personal life, however, she was deeply unhappy and after several suicidal attempts, finally took her own life at the age of 46. Such a loss. But at the end of her career, she published 10 collections. Like all confessional poets, her poems are autobiographical and they give the readers this uncomfortable and intimate look into her psyche. Her poems are laced with deep despair, deep sense of loss, and death wishes. Death. This is a word that fascinates us, frightens us, makes us look away, and also makes us look beyond the immediacy. Perhaps many of you who are listening today have felt this more than ever during the last 2 years of pandemic. And death is one of the topics that intrigued both Tagore and Anne Sexton. Sexton looked at death from a place of despair, hopelessness, and her own obsession with suicide. I want to read to you Sexton's poem, The Truth the Dead Know. It was written in memory of her parents who passed away a few months apart in 1959. From the very first line, and in fact, the first word, gone, there is a poignant pain of loss followed by distancing from the dead. There is a resentment in the silence as she walks away with her lover to spend some time at the Cape. Interestingly, if you listen to the very last stanza, Sexton talks about the finality of death, and the dead seem to be walking away as well. You know, I think it's extremely difficult to say that despair is beautiful. But I find this poem truly beautiful in the heartbreak it expresses and the sheer grandeur of death that defines our fleeting existence in this world. I read to you The Truth the Dead Know by Anne Sexton. Gone, I say, and walk from church, refusing the stiff procession to the grave, letting the dead ride alone in the hearse. It is June. I'm tired of being brave. We drive to the Cape. I cultivate myself, where the sun gutters from the sky, where the sea swings in like an iron gate, and we touch. In another country, people die. My darling, the wind falls in like stones from the white-hearted water, and when we touch, we enter touch entirely. No one's alone. Men kill for this or for as much. And what of the dead? They lie without shoes in their stone boats. They're more like stone than the sea would be if it stopped. They refuse to be blessed, throat, eye, and knucklebone. Like Anne Sexton, death was no stranger to Rabindranath Tagore. In his personal life, he experienced losses to death in quick succession. He lost his mom when he was only 14, then his sister-in-law with whom he felt very close, his wife when she was 30, his father, and then his daughter when she was 13 years of age, followed by the death of his youngest son, again when he was 11. But these tragedies only gave this man a deeper understanding of life. In his poems and songs, death appears as an inevitable guest or a friend. In Tagore's letter to his friend C.F. Andrews, he said, and I quote, "You know, this death was a great blessing to me. I had through it all, day after day, a sense of fulfillment, of completion, as if nothing was lost. I felt that even an atom in the universe seemed lost. It could never actually perish. It was not mere resignation that came to me, but the sense of a fuller life. I knew then, at last, what death was. It was perfection." End quote. This last line always gets to me. Death was perfection. So I'm going to read to you a poem by Tagore in which death is neither a welcome guest nor a friend. Death is to be feared. But then again, is death to be feared? You have to listen to this poem to find out. The poem is called Mrityunjay. The word Mrityunjay means one who defies death. I'll read the poem in Bengali and you will see the translations on the screen. মৃত্যুঞ্জয়। দূর হতে ভেবেছিনু মনে, দুর্জয় নির্দয় তুমি, কাঁপে পৃথ্বী তোমার শাসনে। তুমি বিভীষিকা, দুঃখের বিদীর্ণ বক্ষে জলে তব লেলিহান শিখা। দক্ষিণ হাতের শেল উঠেছে ঝড়ের মেঘ পানে, সেথা হতে বজ্র টেনে আনে। ভয়ে ভয়ে এসেছিনু দুরু দুরু বুকে তোমার সম্মুখে, তোমার ভ্রুকুটি ভঙ্গে তরঙ্গিল আসন্ন উৎপাত। নামিল আঘাত, পাঁজর উঠিল কেঁপে, বক্ষে হাত চেপে শুধালেম, আরো কিছু আছে নাকি, আছে বাকি শেষ বজ্রপাত। নামিল আঘাত, এইমাত্র, আর কিছু নয়। ভেঙে গেল ভয়। যখন উদ্যত ছিল তোমার রসনী, তোমারে আমার চেয়ে বড় বলে নিয়েছিনু গনি। তোমার আঘাত সাথে নেমে এলে তুমি যেথা মোর আপনার ভূমি। ছোট হয়ে গেছো আজ, আমার টুটিল সব লাজ। যত বড় হও, তুমি তো মৃত্যু মৃত্যুর চেয়ে বড় নাও, আমি মৃত্যু চেয়ে বড়, এই শেষ কথা বলে যাব আমি চলে. In an iconic song written and composed by Tagore, death is celebrated as a lover with whom the poet wants to be united.
मरन रे तू मामा श्याम समान. मरन रे मेघबरन तुझ मेघ जटा जुट रक्त कमल कर रक्त आधर पुट ताप विमोचन करुण कोर तव मृत्यु अमृत करे दान. तू मम श्याम समान. आकुल राधा रिझा अति जर जरा झरा मरन तू आओ रे आओ. भुज पाशे तव लह संबोधई आँखि पात मझु देह तुरोधई. कोरयो पर तुझ रोदई रोदई नीद भरव सब देहा. तू नहीं बिसरवी तू नहीं छोड़वी राधा हृदय तू कबहु न तोड़वी. हिया हिया राखवी अनुदिन अनुखन अतुलन तोहार लेहा. भानु भने ओई राधा छिए छिए चंचल चित्त तोहारी. जीवन बल्लभ मरण अधिक सो अब तू देख विचारी. मरण रे श्याम समान मरन रे तो मामा श्याम समान.
Feminism. This is another theme which was a favorite of both Sexton and Tagore. First, I want to talk about Sexton's treatment of the topic. In a male-dominated poetic tradition in the early 1960s, woman confessional poets broke all thematic norms by writing about taboo issues like gender roles, sexuality, abortion, and even masturbation. And Sexton was no exception. The poem I'm about to read now was written by Sexton, and when I read it, it rattled me in an inexplicable way. The poem is called Consorting with Angels, and in it, Sexton talks against stereotyping women's roles. The language is acidic and harsh, but she gets her point across so well that it stayed with me. It haunted me. I would request you to notice the repeated use of the word tired as she explains the stereotypical role of women, and how at the end of the poem, the genders coalesce. Consorting with Angels. I was tired of being a woman, tired of the spoons and the post, tired of my mouth and my breasts, tired of the cosmetics and the silks. There were still men who sat at my table, circled around the bowl I offered up. The bowl was filled with purple grapes, and the flies hovered in for the scent. And even my father came with his white bone. But I was tired of the gender things. Last night I had a dream, and I said to it, "You are the answer. You will outlive my husband and my father." In that dream, there was a city made of chains, where John was put to death in man's clothes, and the nature of the angels went unexplained. No two made in the same species, one with a nose, one with an ear in its hand, one chewing a star and recording its orbit, each one like a poem obeying itself, performing God's functions, a people apart. "You are the answer," I said, and entered, lying down on the gates of the city. Then the chains were fastened around me, and I lost my common gender and my final aspect. Adam was on the left of me, and Eve was on the right of me, both thoroughly inconsistent with the world of reason. We wove our arms together and rode under the sun. I was not a woman anymore, not one thing or the other. O daughters of Jerusalem, the King has brought me into his chamber. I am black and I am beautiful. I have been opened and undressed. I have no arms or legs. I am all one skin like a fish. I am no more a woman than Christ was a man. In the early 20th century, when Tagore lived, the feminism movement swept across the United States. But that wave did not reach the Far East. The South Asian women pretty much lived in a patriarchal society. They were expected to be submissive and follow rules set by men. Not much education was allowed, and the world outside the home was off limits. That being said, The Bengal Renaissance movement was creating an impact in Bengal, India. This movement was a cultural reformation within the state to improve the status of women and women's education. Tagore was one of the pioneers and penned stories, poems, and musicals involving empowered women who broke out of their subservient roles and fought for gender rights, widow remarriage, dowry system, sexual freedom, caste system, and of course, patriarchy. In his Golpo Guccio, or collection of short stories, I am reminded of powerful women like Mrinal, who revolts and breaks away from the submissive and abused housewife's role, Binodini, who is a widow but breaks away from the austerity of a widow's life and seeks sexual freedom, and Mrinmoyi, who is a tomboy and does not give in to the societal pressures of a married woman. These are just a few examples. However, the story of Chitrangada, which Tagore wrote as a musical, has fascinated me the most. Chitra, the warrior princess of Manipur, was born a woman, but grew up as a man. They dealt with gender fluidity all their life and could not get respect and love they deserved from their fiancé, Arjun. Why? Because Arjun wanted to see them in a socially dictated mold. In the end, Arjun realizes his folly and declares his unconditional love. But Chitra presents their terms to be able to love him back. I end my presentation with a song that talks about Chitra's terms.
Ami Chitrangada, Ami Rajendra Nandini, Nohi Devi, Nohi Shama Ami Chitrangada, Puja kori more rakhibe urdhe she যদি পারশে রাখো মোরে সংকটে সম্পদে সম্মতি দাও যদি কঠিন ব্রতে সহায় হতে পাবে তবে তুমি চিনিতে মোরে আজ শুধু করি নিবে আমি চিত্রাঙ্গদা রাজেন্দ্র নন্দিনী।
I have come to the end of my presentation and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, please do share them with me and I will try my best to answer them. Thank you so much for listening. Good night and namaskar.